Hello and welcome to yet another Geek Show. This is our third Zelda spotlight, our spotlight on Link to the Past. As I'm sure you noticed in the title already, this is your host, Alton Munnell.
This is your host, Josh Keir, and I was totally ready to talk about Super Metroid, so I'm embarrassed. I don't know what we're doing. That's a lie. We didn't have a joke to start off the show with, so I figured I'd make a bad joke here instead of right at the start of the episode.
Yeah, that was bad enough. That worked for me.
Yeah, so, true to our usual episode form.
Okay. So, for those who don't know and haven't listened to the prior Zelda spotlights we've put out, working through the series right now is my first exposure to the series. And Link to the Past, game number 3, I gotta say, Josh, this is the one that just made me a fan.
I mean, I think this is the one that made most people fans. You're gonna come into basically two major camps of, I guess, old school Zelda games. One camp posits that Link to the Past is the best Zelda game, and the other camp says that Ocarina of Time is the best Zelda game. Having only played, well, I've played all of them. You having only played one of them. I'm really excited to then play Ocarina, and we can have that debate, or maybe just agree with each other, depending on where you land.
Well, as much as I hope I keep enjoying the series as much as I enjoyed this one, I wouldn't bet on me enjoying the early 3D ones, because I think we know how those tend to age if you weren't there at the time. So we'll see. I hope those hold up for a newcomer.
I think you'd be surprised with the 3D Zeldas, but I'll be really interested to see whether or not that's just my admittedly massive nostalgia boner talking.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, okay. It doesn't have to be as good as this game to satisfy me, because I did enjoy the first two. You know, I gave them both positive reviews in our previous episodes. I'm just saying, this is the one where I get it. So they kind of ignored all the fundamental gameplay changes of Zelda 2, and as much as I surprisingly enjoyed Zelda 2, I think we all ended up agreeing that it slightly had the edge over 1. I'm glad it went back to the original format and just picked out the things to do better and just hit a home run with it.
Absolutely. Link to the Past is definitely where the Zelda series hits its stride. And you're going to see a lot of things that this game really laid the foundation for, a lot of structural things that the Zelda series is going to dip back into again and again and again and again. Sort of the whole narrative loop of, like, that starts off in this game of, the game begins, you have some little story-related sequence that kind of brings you into the world, establishes what's going on, and then you have 3 smaller dungeons to kind of, like, get you into the game, and then you get the Master Sword and are thrust into the real quest of saving 7 whatevers.
Save the 7 MacGuffins, yeah.
Save the 7 MacGuffins, which a lot of the time in this series are, well, at least in this game, they're all, nameless maidens, and
mm-hmm.
they attempt to kind of have you rescue characters that they give names to later on. But
I will say
this sort of thing is something that I guess it was so good in Link to the Past that they decided let's not fix what's not broken, and they went back to it. They go back to it a lot. But I don't think that's a bad thing, because I thought that this game did a very good job.
Sure, I will say I'll appreciate it if we get to the early 3D era and it turns out they put a little bit more effort into the actual story, because I feel like that's not really there yet. It's improved, but it's not really there yet. This is still just about enjoying the exploration, and that works so well that the original Zelda just feels like an early prototype now.
It really does. This almost feels like, well, I guess in a lot of ways, this is a reboot of the franchise, because it's only the third game. The second game veered way off course, and instead of continuing on that course for the third, they said, well, let's take what was good about the first game and iterate on that and see how we can kind of, like, just make it so much better. And yeah, they do give you a little bit more of a narrative framing in Link to the Past, but the story's not anything to write home about. But I guess as a silver lining to that cloud, it also doesn't stand in the way of throwing you out into the world and letting you explore, which some people start to have gripes with later games in the franchise for being a little bit more cinematic and maybe locking them out of doing as much exploration as they would like to.
Sure. Okay,
it is
so I guess
really hard for me to talk about this game without framing it in the context of games that you haven't played. I'm just going to say that right now.
Without addressing what it's inspired in the later games, you mean?
Yeah.
Sure. So I guess we can just stick with what it's improved on the originals. So the first thing that jumps out to me is the graphics, in that the original Zelda looks fine. Zelda 2 looks bad, even though I liked the game. This might be the best looking Super NES game.
Oh, just like in general.
Yeah, just the whole art design, the varied dungeons, the different environments you walk over. Link's pink hair is charming, I guess. I don't know, that's weird. But but just I don't know, the visuals just really worked for me here. For me previously, the best looking Super NES game was always Super Mario World, which is still maybe my favorite platformer, but this is a better looking game now that I've played it.
I think to me the best looking Super NES game is probably Chrono Trigger, but
okay.
It seems that we have different opinions on that. That's okay. This game is definitely gorgeous, though. I cannot deny that at all.
Yeah. I guess it's a weird competition to have, but maybe Chrono Trigger pushes the hardware a little more impressively, but just the general style of this game is what I'm into.
Oh, sure. I mean, the game is charming as hell.
Although I guess maybe the super charming and cute art style doesn't contribute well to the possibility of giving it a super serious story.
I don't think the game was really supposed to have a super serious story.
Right.
I think, yeah.
Like right, I'm just saying I don't know if it would have worked very well if they went for it.
Oh, right. No, I think you're right there. Because of the visual style of the game, it kind of had to be fairly lighthearted.
Yeah, but so just generally, I just find it really, colorful and just, I don't know, it makes me feel good to look at it. That's all there really is to say about that. The actual controls, it's been long enough now since we did the first game that I know I was unhappy with the way the controls felt, but I don't remember to put in words why that was. It just felt really stiff to me, and this game absolutely does not. I felt like I was in full control of the situation the entire time. And yeah, there are places here and there where this is stupidly hard, but I at least never felt like the controls got in my way.
The only gripe I've ever really had with the controls of this game is that Link in Link to the Past actually swings his sword in a different way than, like, I think every other 2D Zelda that sticks to this formula, where, like, in the original NES Zelda, you just press sword and Link just kind of, like, stabs out with his sword, and it goes a certain range out of his body, and that's fine. In Link to the Past, he kind of swings it in more of an arc. It actually feels like there's less, like, the sword doesn't go out as far in front of Link as it would if it was a stab. So maybe it's just, like, my inability to adapt to it, but I always, especially when I go back to playing this game, I have a lot of difficulty actually getting too close to things and while trying to hit them and running straight into them, or just being too far away and swinging it and coming up with nothing but air. Link's Awakening, which is the next 2D Zelda, as well as the Oracle games, they all have a closer to the original Zelda version of the sword attacks are more stabby, and I think Minish Cap might actually be more swipey compared to Link to the Past, and this is a really,
Mhm.
really nitpicky gripe that I have. That's probably just I'm used to something else and complaining about it because it's different. I don't necessarily think that it's better or worse.
I mean, I think it affects the feel pretty significantly because it's not just a visual choice. I mean, it seems to really affect the hitbox.
Right. So I guess my question here is, did you struggle to hit things with the sword, and did you ever wish that maybe Link's arm was just a little bit longer while you were playing?
No, I actually had a really smooth experience with the sword here.
Okay, well then I guess I was just used to other games and I needed to get good.
Yeah, and I mean, when I didn't nail it, the shield felt really good. So, yeah, all in all, I guess the key here for controls is that for me, relative to, man, we can't even compare it to Zelda 2 because the combat is from a totally different perspective, let alone the intricacies of how he's attacking.
Right.
But in regards to the only other 2D I've played, the original, yeah, it just feels better in every way. And maybe it's not even the sword. Maybe it's just the way you walk. Maybe the way you walk is just what's feeling way better for me.
Oh yeah, and in absolutely every other way, the game controls so much better that it's not even worth talking about. It's the one thing that I guess I'm maybe just used to other Zelda games that swing the sword a little bit differently, where I'm trying to remember at the first time I played Link to the Past, like what number Zelda game was that for me? And I think it might have been like my 6th or 7th Zelda game that I played at that point in my life.
Sure.
It's kind of interesting because, well, we're going through things in reverse order, you and I. So,
in that you started with what was newer at the time and worked backwards?
Well, I started with Ocarina, so that was my first. It's not my favorite, but it's still up there. But the big divide is 2D versus 3D Zelda, as opposed to like which vision for the franchise do fans prefer more. And I think I lean a bit more towards the 3D side because that was what I was introduced to the series with. So what Zelda is to me is a 3D game. But
sure,
man, I can't say really anything bad about Link to the Past. You know, it's really interesting. I think there are two really major gameplay mechanics that Link to the Past introduced. Like Link to the Past did this first, and it was a really big step for the franchise. I think the first was verticality in dungeon design. And what I mean by that is that, you know, you still don't have much context in the series at this point, but if you think back to Zelda 1, all of the dungeons were on the same, like, vertical plane, and maybe you'd step into a staircase and go through a little underground segment that was like one screen long and connected you to a staircase in a different part of the dungeon, but it was the same floor.
Sure,
you know
and 2 is... Yeah, sure, and 2 is technically vertical, but you lose a different direction of movement.
Right. And where A Link to the Past is different, obviously, is the dungeons are broken up into floors that you have to traverse up and down stairs to access. And the really interesting thing that opens up is that there are some navigational puzzles throughout this game that require you to, say, push a block through the hole in a room on floor 5 so that it falls into the room below it on floor 4, and then you can use that block to like hold down a switch to open up a door or something like that. And this is really basic stuff for like every Zelda game after that, which, as you'll probably come to see, but Link to the Past definitely did it first. And I mean, I think that it just really forces you as you're playing the game to really just kind of think about where you are in the dungeon and like learning about your environment and how to navigate it and how to use everything in the dungeon to your advantage, which I think is something that when the Zelda series does this well, no other franchise can match it. And Link to the Past is absolutely where all of that started. I mean, compared to later dungeons in the franchise, I don't think Link to the Past has anything close to like my top 10 dungeons in the series. but all the dungeons are an absolute joy to play. Everything's really fun, and you do get really cool puzzles like that where they force you to they force you to do things like jumping off of when you have to fall through a hole in the Tower of Hera to get to the treasure chest with the moon pearl in it, because that's the only way to get to that chest after you beat the enemies that are guarding it. I would love to be in the head of somebody who played that back in 92 or 93 when this game came out, because I feel like concepts like that probably were pretty novel at the time.
Sure.
So, I mean, I felt pretty clever the first time when I played this game the first time and realized, oh, I have to fall through this hole to get down there. But I really wonder if at the time, maybe that kind of concept might not even have been done before. So what do you do in the first game you ever play where falling through a hole, which is normally something bad, is actually a good thing because the levels are laid out in a way so you actually have to remember where you are above in the level as you're playing on a different floor.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely getting at one of the strong points for me, which is the just total fundamental change to dungeon design, where it's actually interesting now, both graphically to look at and to actually explore, where, before they all aesthetically were just clones of each other and there wasn't much puzzle solving to do, and the lack of using all three dimensions, whereas here you have all kinds of falling through the floor and all kinds of switches and ladders, and maybe the ladder doesn't even take you to a different screen, it just takes you higher in the portion you're still looking at. And just the exploration within the dungeons themselves feels so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second thing that this game introduced, that I don't know if this was the first game to do it, but it's the first one that comes to mind to me, it sort of introduced this, what is now a gaming trope of exploring two interconnected worlds at the same time. That being, in this game, the light world that you start off in, and the dark world where you can progress, you can swap between worlds. Well, you can go from the dark world back to the light world by using the magic mirror item. And this is a game design idea that Nintendo fell in love with so hard that not only have they used it in like half of the other Zelda games that they make other in the franchise, but this has bled into a ton of other games that Nintendo's put out. I can think of like Metroid Prime 2 off the top of my head. Castlevania, like Symphony of the Night, or what's the one that I played? Harmony of Dissonance on the Game Boy Advance was like you're going through a castle and a mirror image of the same castle, and little things that you do in one map can affect things in the other map. And that's a trope and a half now. Like
I've played several recent great indie games that used this mechanic in one way or another.
Right, and to my knowledge, I could be wrong about this, and if there's another game that did this first, somebody please correct me. It's definitely implemented for the first time in a Zelda game here, but I can't even really think of a game doing this before A Link to the Past.
This is the first time it's occurred to me that it's a trope, even though I can think of several places I've seen it now. The first place I saw it was in some Silent Hill game for the PS2. So it bled into some very different games in that way. That said, the general exploration, though, too, just outside of the dungeons as well, worked a lot better for me, in the sense that I was able to do 98% of this without looking at a guide, which utterly blew me away, and it was fun the whole time. I mean, for a game of this era, today we expect to pull it off with, markers on a map, and this game, at the very least, does give you dungeon entrances on a map, but in regards to figuring out what you need to do next, it is pretty good about giving you the right advice without just pinpointing it for you.
Can I hazard a guess as to one of the spots you did have to look up a guide to proceed on?
Sure.
Did you have to look up a guide to figure out where to get the lightning magic you need to open up the swamp dungeon?
Oh, remind me where you get it.
If I remember correctly, you have to go back up to where the Tower of Hera is, which means you have to climb all the way up to the top of Death Mountain, step on the portal to go into the Dark World, walk up a little bit, and then swap back, and then get to the entrance of that tunnel, or to that tower, and then go cross a bridge to the left and do something at a statue. When I recently replayed this game a few months ago, I was able to play it all without looking at a guide, except for that part.
I actually don't think I looked that one up.
You just stumble into that one on your own?
To my memory, yeah, I do believe.
Maybe it was just my complete and utter hatred for climbing Death Mountain that I would refuse to do it at every turn, unless I absolutely had to. So.
Okay, that is going to be a major downside to this game, is exploring Death Mountain, because, boy, you have to do it over and over again, especially, at a point where you're not totally certain where you need to be, and you guessed wrong about needing to be at the top of Death Mountain.
Right.
That was an utter nightmare to deal with. So, yeah, I'll knock points for that. A moment that comes to mind when I had to look up something was the whole bit of the game where you what was it? There was a character, the character that ends up like turning into a tree, and that whole little mini part of the story where you
yes,
it's been a couple months now since we've actually played this, but you had to like get the shovel and then dig
up his flute,
yeah, and then when you play the flute he turns. I think that was a bit I did not figure out on my own.
Yeah, that side quest, it's a little bit cryptic, but, like, they definitely give you hints. Because, if I remember correctly, when the guy that gives you the flute, before he turns into a tree, he asks you to go take the flute to his dad in the village. You actually do find an old man in the bar in Kakariko Village, where I'm pretty sure if you talk to him once you have the flute, he'll tell you that, like, oh, my son loved that flute. He used to play it in front of the statue of the stupid duck in the middle of town that we have for some reason. Which I guess is, like, enough of a hint to go there and play the flute that you can unlock the super necessary fast travel mechanic that I imagine there's somebody in 1992 that played through the entire game without actually realizing that it was there. But I would not have wanted to play through this game without it.
I did realize it was there. I'm getting better at games. And then in one of the Dark World dungeons, you had to find the hammer to get through a certain spot, and I hadn't found the hammer, and I was looking at the like pink things you had to hammer down to walk over, and that one took me long enough to look up a map of the dungeon and be like, all right, I missed an item somewhere. But I think that's the only time I looked up something for the inside of a dungeon.
Yeah, you're gonna become very used to, I guess, the Zelda franchise staple of you go into a dungeon and there are parts of it you can't access until you've found the new item that's in that dungeon that then lets you like get into the later half of the dungeon and or fight the boss.
Yeah,
that's another Zelda series staple that was really introduced in this game. I mean, there were items in the dungeons in the other two Zelda games, but I don't think that they like blended as well into gameplay as they do from Link to the Past onwards.
Yeah, sure. There is a gameplay mechanic here that really aids the exploration that we haven't mentioned yet, which is that when you are really truly stumped and can't figure it out, there is a psychic that will tell you what to do next.
The fortune teller, yes.
I did resort to this semi-regularly, which felt a lot better than looking up a guide.
Right, because the fortune teller, while pointing you in the right direction, isn't saying go here and do this. They'll generally just kind of give you a hint that'll let you puzzle it out the rest yourself. And it's probably not that different because the hints that they give aren't super cryptic, but you're right. No, it does feel good to do that, and you're getting help from within the game as opposed to looking up something on GameFAQs instead.
Sure. This is strangely relevant to the discussion we just had in the weekly we just recorded regarding
yeah.
things feeling better if they're built into the game, even though you have the option either way. If I have one moment in the exploration that really frustrated me, though, is that let's see. Like I said, it's been a couple months, so if I'm remembering this correctly, you get to, I guess, before Ganon, but I think in the final dungeon, there's a boss where you needed the fire wand and the ice wand.
Yeah.
To fight this boss.
I think that's the last dungeon before Ganon. Yes.
Yes. I made it there without one of the wands. And it was really frustrating to me that it allowed me to get to the boss without the weapons I needed.
It was probably the ice rod that you were missing. Because you get the fire rod as a dungeon item in one of the Dark World levels, but the ice rod you can find in the overworld, like at the very beginning of the game before you even get the Master Sword. You get a hint to go look there once, and then you don't need the item until the very end of the game, so it's super easy to miss. So yeah, you're right. It is. I think it actually is possible to beat that boss without the rods, but it's a lot more difficult. And bosses in this game are actually pretty darn hard. So you kind of need all the help you can get.
I'm actually not sure that it is possible without both of them.
Oh, well, maybe I'm full of shit.
Yeah. or misremembering, or maybe I'm wrong, but it sure felt impossible to me. I think you couldn't actually... Was it reverse? Was there like a fire head and an ice head, and you had to hit the fire head with the ice wand, and vice versa? So you couldn't actually damage that head without it. And then once you hit them with the appropriate wand, then you could slash at them. But you couldn't damage the appropriate head at all without both wands. So that was the only moment where I felt like totally screwed and ripped off and frustrated, because I had fought my way through that dungeon and then just had to leave and then look up what item am I missing and where is it. And there are items that are optional. Like, I didn't finish with every item you can find.
Yeah, not all of the games or not all of the items, are actually required to finish the game, which is cool because it gives you a lot of extra things. Like, for instance, the thunder spell that you need to get into the swamp dungeon is actually the only magical spell that you need to get, but there's... Oh, I know, you need Quake as well, but you only need it in one place. But there's at least one other magic spell that you can find that you don't need to at all.
Sure, yeah, and then that's, in a way, that makes the exploration feel more rewarding, too, because you explored and you found something. You didn't need it, you just went out on your own and, you know, and earned something that wasn't required of you. So that feels good, but I was frustrated that I needed this wand and it allowed me to get there. I would have rather somehow found out at the front of the dungeon, you know, just give me an obstacle at the front that I can't get through without it. If I'm going to need it at the boss, don't let me get to the boss.
Yeah.
But
this is actually an aspect of the game that I've seen criticized a lot. That specific thing, needing the ice rod to beat that boss towards the end of the game. And I don't think that the series ever makes this mistake again. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that they learned their lesson from that exact case.
Good. But so, just that moment and anytime I had to climb Death Mountain, those were the only frustrating bits of exploration for me, though. Everything else went smoothly and felt good and felt rewarding, and I just don't know that I have anything else to complain about.
The only thing that ever really frustrated me about exploration in this game is the couple times where I would teleport back from the dark world to the light world and then do something that made it impossible to get back to the portal that you leave behind.
Okay.
That always lets you return to the dark world from the place you left it.
Sure.
Sometimes there were things where, like, there was a cliff in the light world that had like a piece of heart or something on it that you could only get to by standing in the corresponding spot in the dark world and like traversing worlds again. But if you were stupid, like I frequently am, and jumped off of that cliff, there was no way to get back to your portal, so you were stuck going back to one of the few like portals between the worlds that exist in the light world, and making you go all over the damn place just to kind of get back to where you were. Also, there were some times where like I would cut a bush and then stand where the bush was and switch worlds, and then when you try to go through your portal back to the dark world, the bush would have respawned, and the game would like you'd like try to phase in on the bush, and then because the space was blocked by a bush, you'd just get kicked back out into the light world.
Huh, interesting. I never had that happen.
Well, yeah, I'm just really good at like screwing myself over, I guess.
The thing with the portal, I guess that did manage to frustrate me a few times, but at the same time, there are puzzles that are built around you not being able to like take the portal with you, and so there would have to be some fundamental changes to not use that mechanic.
Oh yeah, I think it's definitely a deliberate mechanic, and for the most part, I do really like the fact that there are areas that you can only get to by going through the corresponding like both parts of the same area in both worlds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't actually know that I have anything else to say about the gameplay because I have such few complaints about it. All I can really say is that it works. So I guess I'll mention the music now.
I wanted to talk about the music next, too.
Okay. So we are back to Koji Kondo for this one. And talking about the music before, the original Zelda game has great music, but very little music. Zelda 2 had a couple standouts, and surprisingly was not Koji Kondo. We all came to that realization while we're doing the spotlight.
Right.
Still a few highlights in there that people tend to know. But this game, in terms of music, is the big one now. There's a lot of music now, and it's all as good as what was in Zelda 1.
Oh yeah, this soundtrack is iconic. It's just, I don't really have anything to say about it other than the fact that it's a masterpiece.
Yeah, I think the general, style of the franchise gets more defined here musically. I mean, it still sounds like Zelda 1, and so you can say it was already grounded there, but Zelda 1 also only had 2 or 3 pieces of music. So,
right, and the soundtrack is massively expanded here.
Yeah.
Although I will say that I think there's only one dungeon theme in this game. I'm pretty sure the same song plays in every dungeon you're in. Unless there's a split between like the early game dungeon music and the post Master Sword dungeon music. I don't think there is, but it's been a few months since I played this game again.
Right.
So I did get tired of hearing that theme by the end of the game. And I think from here on out, like in other Zelda games, every dungeon has its own unique musical theme that plays while you're in the dungeon. And that's something I think that this game is now a little bit dated on that front, just because other games in the franchise have conditioned me to expect different themes for every dungeon that I'm in.
Sure. I mean, this isn't breaking any records for the most music in a game. I guess I'm just pointing out that unlike the first game, it is a full soundtrack. I would certainly be happy with there being more to it.
More songs are always better, especially when they're songs of... When the Koji Kondo songs are going to be of this quality. What we do get in this game is fantastic. There's not a single song that I dislike.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if your only criticism for a soundtrack is I wish there was a little bit more of it...
Yeah.
That's not really that much of a criticism.
Yeah, you're in a good place. This is a pretty lengthy game to not have a lot of music. It's certainly longer than the last two. I remember messaging you after I first got into the Dark World, and initially, for a moment, believing that I had hit the halfway point, and I was so far from it. That said, I was thrilled when I realized I was nowhere close, because I was having a great time. But yeah, it's pretty lengthy to... like with one dungeon theme, you are going to spend a lot of time in a dungeon hearing it. You are going to keep returning to places on the map that have their own theme over and over again. that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm wondering how long of a game that this is probably, would you say like a 10 to 15 hour game? I would say maybe maybe even longer, maybe more like 20 hours. I've never
I
this game it doesn't have a game timer, so I've never actually tracked how long it takes to beat. But
Yeah, I feel like it was closer to 20, which is very long compared to the prior two games. That's probably not long for a Zelda game, I'm sure.
But if you wanted to go find all the pieces of heart, wow, how did I even miss that part? That's something else that's new to the franchise in Link to the Past that is something that they use for the rest of the series is the heart pieces, giving you little tidbits of a reward to kind of like encourage exploration. I love hunting for heart pieces. It's one of my favorite things to do in pretty much every game that you can. Another thing that Link to the Past originated.
Well, in Zelda 2 though, I don't believe it was a heart system, but you did have to level up your health. So there's still that.
There were a couple, I guess, heart containers you could find that would increase your like total life meter. But I mean, you could do that in the first game. They were just all dungeon prizes. What I really think is the sort of innovation in Link to the Past is that you're finding just a single. You're not finding a whole heart every time. You're finding a piece of a heart, which means that they can give you they can hide a bunch of little challenges along the map, where you're constantly solving these smaller puzzles or like playing a mini game or something where you're very frequently being rewarded for going out of your way to explore the game world a little bit further, as opposed to there only being like 2 or 3 heart containers to find in all of Zelda 2. Maybe it's 4. It's not that many of them. So when you find one, it feels really good, but also when you're looking around the world, there's not a whole lot to find. And I really like the idea of, in Link to the Past, there's so many heart pieces for you to find, it makes you feel like there's something behind every corner, and it makes you want to search all those corners.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you that. That is a significant difference. And I did enjoy frequently finding the heart pieces. I will say, I didn't find anywhere near close to all of them. So yeah, it would have rewarded me more for doing more exploration. I think what's the max you end up with?
I also
20?
think that lends an element of replayability to the games. You've got a lot of Zelda to play, so I don't know when, if ever, you're going to feel the need to go back and replay one of these. But, as somebody who's replayed most Zelda games a few times, there's always going to be some heart pieces that you remember how to get from the first time that you played, but sometimes you might stumble across something that you didn't know was there the first time you played the game. And that, I don't know, I just really think that it kind of lends itself to the whole spirit of exploration that this franchise wants to cultivate.
Sure. You can end up with 20 full hearts here, and I think I had only 14 when I finished it. And so if you were struggling, you could take it as a message that, oh man, I better go explore more and get my max health up. And that max health would make a big difference as to whether or not you were going to be capable of beating the boss fight. Although, you can theoretically beat the whole game with very little health.
Right, if you're just good enough at not getting hit, you can win the game with 3 hearts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also... I've mentioned before, I haven't actually opened it in months now, so I shouldn't say I'm doing it right now, but I've started playing Breath of the Wild, and, the biggest thing I've really loved there is that, at least as far as I've gotten, there's no hard cutoffs anywhere. Like, so far, there's no, oh, you need this spell to do this. It's just a matter of whether through like the items you're holding, the like items you eat to get a temporary boost, whatever you've leveled up, it's a matter of, can you make it from here to there? But it's not a hard cutoff. It's not, oh, now we gave you a climbing ability and you can get here. It's, do you have enough stamina and enough skill to use that stamina effectively to get from here to there? So I guess this is a similar feeling where if you can do it with very little hearts, go for it. We're not gonna hold you back. We're not gonna make you level up and then award you your way into certain areas with like a spell that you don't get until you hit a certain level.
Right. It's more just like, hey, if you explore, we're going to give you a buffer against damage that you don't even actually have to take.
Yeah.
This is actually really funny because it's going to tie back into the conversation we just had in our most recent weekly about players in like self-imposing challenges in video games. Kind of a common thing for a lot of Zelda games for that kind of self-imposed rule set that fans will do are 3 heart runs where you beat the entire game with the initial 3 hearts. You don't ever pick up the heart container at the end of the dungeon. You don't find any pieces of heart. And I just got done talking about how I very frequently don't do these sorts of things in games, but I've actually done 3 heart runs of a few different Zelda games and enjoyed those to the point where if Nintendo ever actually put a mode in these games where you were supposed to only have 3 hearts and that was all you could ever get, I probably would play them. But maybe not in Link to the Past, because there's just a ton of stuff going on in every room of a dungeon where it's just really easy to take hits.
Yeah, and I mean you can take hits that take 3 hearts of damage.
Right. Yeah, late game 1 hit's gonna be, I hope you have a fairy.
Yeah. So that said, in terms of difficulty, would you say this game felt easier than the last 2?
Definitely. It's easier in the first in that while I think the dungeon design is a lot better and the dungeons are probably harder to navigate, it's just by the fact that it sort of modernizes the whole concept of the first game so much to the point where it's not so much easier as it is like less dated, I guess, and it feels better to play as a result. It's absolutely easier than Zelda 2. I think Zelda 2 is probably the hardest Zelda game of all time. It's also the one that's least like an actual Zelda game.
I hope it's the hardest one. I can't call it
not a Zelda game because it is a Zelda game, but it's really not.
Boy, I really hope it's the hardest one. Although, I am so miserable at Cadence of Hyrule and Crypt of the Necrodancer that I think for me, Cadence of Hyrule could end up being the most difficult one because I am utterly useless at it.
Maybe that's a discussion for another day, but I loved Cadence.
Topic change on whether that technically qualifies for a spotlight later on. But yeah, that's a challenge that I'm not looking forward to, even though I love the idea on a conceptual level. All right, I don't think I have anything more to add about this. I hope we managed to be somewhat entertaining and insightful, but it's hard when there's so little to criticize. This game was a real breakthrough for me where I liked the last 2 good enough, but with this one, I finally get it. I would wager that this game goes into maybe not a top 10 games I've played of all time, but probably a top 15 if I had to do it. This has me a lot more excited to keep moving forward with this.
It's the most fascinating part about this whole series that we're doing is being able to kind of re-experience the franchise through fresh eyes. You know, your eyes. Thanks for giving me your eyes. Because this is my favorite franchise of all time, so all these games are very near and dear to my heart, and it's really just nice to see somebody who's never played these games before experience them and enjoy them for all the same reasons that, you know, I enjoyed them back in the day and still enjoy them today.
Sure. Yeah, these are well, this one more so than the others is holding up very well for me. I wouldn't be disappointed or frustrated if some indie developer had created this game this year, honestly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That said, you'll find out some point in the near future how I eventually feel about Link's Awakening. So look forward to that, and thanks for listening.
All right, have a good one, everybody.
Bye.